My name's Steve Pearce. I'm head of sales here at TJC, and I'm presenting here today with Gareth Russell from Diversey. Diversey have been a customer of ours for 3 years, and they're going to talk about their archiving journey from sort of inception to completion. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes, no more, just introducing TJC for those of you who aren't too familiar with us, and then the interesting bit will be straight after that. So who are TJC then? Well, for 25 years or so, we've helped customers with their data volume management requirements. For 10 years, we've been doing data extract for tax and audit, and we also do legacy system decommissioning as well. So more than 500 clients worldwide, and of course, SAP partners, and all of our software is SAP certified as well. Our areas of expertise fall into 4 main categories, really. So data archiving in SAP. So that's not only sort of right sizing for the move to HANA, for example, and reducing the size of the corporate database, but it's also trying to control that growth of data over time. Very important. GDPR, so that's really applying deletion rules to that data and making sure that you remain compliant. Apologies, I've just gone a bit quick there. Legacy system decommissioning. So it's especially prevalent now, of course, because so many companies going to S4, they're looking over their shoulder and wondering what to do with those legacy systems. So we're helping them with that, and that's with SAP and non-SAP systems, which differs from archiving, because the archiving is really only within SAP. And tax and audit. So we extract data from disparate systems, and we make sure that companies get the right data in the right format and at the right time for their tax and audit submissions. So there's a ubiquitous slide here with a few of our logos on, but of course the important one today is Diversey. And I'll hand over to Gareth with no further ado, and let him introduce himself and take you through that journey. Thank you very much.
Yes, Steve. So yeah, hi, I'm Gareth Russell. I'm from Diversey. I'm just going to take you through what we've done and the journey we're on from an archiving point of view. So start about a bit about me. From our learning about archiving through to sort of deploying the strategy, the approach we took from that strategy, quick wins that we took on the way, dealing with the harder stuff, and then a little bit about why TJC are okay to work with. No, pretty good to work with. So first of all, Diversey. You can see it says 100 years there. 1923, it was founded in Chicago. Then Molson, yes, Molson Coors, the brewery, bought it as part of their trying to do other things with mixing liquids. And then Johnson Wax bought it in 2002, and then Sealed Air in 2011. And then we were spun out from Sealed Air and owned by Bain Capital. And then in July this year, we were acquired by Solenis. So I'm theoretically a Solenis employee now, but this was a Diversey journey. So still talking about it from a Diversey point of view as opposed to the bigger company. So what does Diversey do? You can see some of the pictures up there. We make cleaning chemicals, we make cleaning machines, we provide cleaning solutions across hospitality, healthcare, retail, food service, building services. In fact, if you go downstairs, you'll see our chemicals being used to clean the tables. When you see a guy pushing a machine through later, scrubbing the floors, that'll be one of ours as well. Every hotel you've been staying in this week has probably had Diversey chemical cleaning your room. So we've been keeping you safe, if that's okay with you. So that's enough about Diversey. So about me, I'm currently the Senior Director for CRM, which isn't much to do with SAP because I'm actually doing Salesforce stuff now, but I had a long background in SAP. But prior to getting into SAP, I used to run cocktail bars and nightclubs, do a bit of sailing, ran a mobile entertainment business, and never wanted to work in an office. So then had a falling out with my regional manager in a nightclub at a time, and then took a 5-week contract in at 1-to-1. For those of you old enough will remember, with a precursor to EE and T-Mobile. And Mercury, even before that, was what it was called when I first joined. I joined there for a 5-week contract, which turned into 18 years. When 1-to-1 was acquired by T-Mobile, which is part of the Deutsche Telekom group, all of a sudden you have to do SAP, German company. You need to fix your ERP, you do SAP. Never heard of SAP, but I got pulled into the project as a subject matter expert from the network side. And from there, got involved in all sorts of projects, from the initial implementation of project systems through to doing retail, real estate, commissions, all very high intensive data type applications in SAP. And then we had the merger with Orange and became EE. And then our SAP systems got even bigger as part of that consolidation that we did. Then I got sold off to IBM as part of an outsourcing, left there fairly quickly, and then ended up in Sealed Air, which was one of the coolest places to say you worked because they invented bubble wrap. Company now, we make cleaning chemicals, isn't quite so cool as inventing bubble wrap, but there you go. So I was there as an enterprise architect for a while, focusing on the supply chain space. And then when Diversey was carved out, went with Diversey as enterprise architect for applications, covering everything from SAP to e-commerce to CRM systems, etc. So that's where I am now in various roles along the way. But if I go back to the beginning of the archiving journey with Diversey, it actually started back here in 2017. A colleague of mine from EE was presenting with TJC maybe in this room or the one next door, I'm not sure. There weren't any better talks to go to at that time, and I've always been interested in trying to get archiving on the table at some point, so I thought I'd pop in and see what EE had been up to. I knew the systems extremely well, so I knew the challenge they had ahead of them with what they were doing. So listened into that, found out some information, also knowing EE very well and what their RFP process was like. You know that TJC would have had to have jumped through a number of hoops to get selected against anyone else. So that as well gave me some confidence in what they were able to do. Then while we were doing that, we were also moving everything to Azure. As part of being spun off from Sealed Air, we had to separate 700 servers from the Sealed Air data center into our own data centers. We pushed most of that into Azure, including SAP, which in turn gives more opportunities for archiving because we can size the disk appropriately rather than fixed hardware where you've already bought the disk and you can't really do much with it once you've bought it. So then towards the end of 2018, I think it was, early 2019, I was over in our Fort Mill office, and while getting a coffee, some of our SAP leaders were saying, oh, we need to do archiving, we need to do archiving. And I went, there was a thing I heard last year, this company TJC, need to get them involved, they can do some good stuff with us. Problem there was I was talking to Americans. It wasn't their idea, so it wasn't a good one. So we then had a whole load of politics playing out. They had to have a conversation with SAP US about what SAP US would recommend. And we went through a process about 3-4 months of, well, I saw this company at Sapphire and I did this and I did that. So we ended up putting together an RFP which said, right, we need to do archiving. Tell us what we need to do. We didn't really know what we needed to do other than our systems were too big and needed to be smaller. So just to give a bit of context on the systems, we had 2 main SAP systems. There was a third one as well, but fairly small, so not that relevant. And another 12 ERPs as well, knocking around from various acquisitions. And a BW system. When we looked at the total landscape, including test systems, there was 168 terabytes of database across those systems. So save 10% of that, all of a sudden, you're starting to talk serious money. So just based on the size of those systems, we really did need to do something. So as part of the RFP, we had 4 vendors for the RFP. TJC that I'd said put in the RFP, our existing AMS provider, and 2 recommended by SAP USA. Basically, the RFPs came back looking at it 2 ways. They either came back saying, we're going to give you a load of resource, it's going to cost you a load of money, and at the end, we'll tell you what we can do. And the other option was, we can give you a few resources right now, we can spend a bit of time analyzing stuff for a small amount of money, and then tell you how you could do that. And it doesn't have to be with us, it could be with someone else at that point. And the way those options came back was the other 3 were all the massive expense, and TJC were we'll come in, spend a small amount of money, work out what you need to do. You can then take that and go off and do it yourself, or work with us to deliver it. Up to you. So based on where we were in our life cycle at the time, so this was, I think, September 2019, where we were sort of making the decision on the RFPs. 2018, because of the carve out from Sealed Air, we'd spent a ridiculous amount of money on systems. Hundreds of millions of dollars had been spent on IT and transforming IT and separating IT and things like that. And everyone was going, whoa, IT, you need to stop spending money. As happens with these things, you can only get away with it for so long. So that was another driver for taking the TJC approach, which was do this sort of initial expertise piece and then be able to decide what we do next, and also understand what are we going to get out of what we invest longer term. So for the expertise phase, we had a few of the TJC team come in. Ruben sat over there, was one of them. And basically we had the 2 ECC6 systems and the BW system analyzed by TJC. It started off with having some conversations with us around, well, what are our objectives with this? And my objective was, I need a smaller system, and I don't want the business getting involved in decisions on how we make it smaller. Because if I get the business involved, I need that data forever. It's like, well, you don't really need it forever, and it doesn't need to be in the database, but wanted to avoid those conversations as much as possible. So based on those sort of high-level objectives, they went away, analyzed the systems. They came back with an executive summary for each system, which is about 4 pages long, suitable for our CIO to digest. And then there was a detailed strategy document for each one, which was between 55 and 60 pages long, going into really, really deep detail on every object you could go after, from the ones you should go after, how you should approach them, how you should treat them, and what you could get out of it on an object-by-object basis. The other really cool thing as well, which they've got, is they've got this cool spreadsheet which you can play with to say, okay, if I want to archive for 5 years, I'm going to get this. And it also profiles in your growth, so you can see how I move the levers to then come up with, well, how do I keep my system straight, or how do I have a small amount of growth, or even sort of a negative growth? And you can play around with that, which then helps you do your strategy. So at the point we were making decisions about what to do next, our production systems were at 43.6 terabytes, and we were growing at about 7.7 terabytes a month per system. So storage is cheap nowadays, but it's still not that cheap when you're growing multiple terabytes a month. So from that work we got from TJC, we then decided to take a two-pronged approach. First of all, go after the quick wins, and we felt we could do that ourselves. Based on the information that was in the strategy in the detailed documents, we could work with that with some of our team. And then for the more difficult stuff, actually put together a proposal, understand the costings of it, and then go for approval for that external spend that we'd need to support us with that. So beginning of 2020, we started the quick wins, and we defined aggressive rules for some technical objects. So IDOC archiving hadn't been done for ages. Reader logs, RSC logs, change logs, all of this, none of it was really defined very well. We started in January across the 2 production ECC systems and BW, and completed that work in April. Yeah, April 2020, that point when the world changed. But thankfully, we'd got most of it done before then. And overall, we removed 27.6 terabytes across the landscape from that activity. With the growth, though, the actual reduction was nearer 21.4 terabytes. And we've now got monthly jobs running to maintain that position based on those initial rules that we set up. And the whole process we used there, we used the archive objects to get rid of the data, but then we deleted those archive files when they're created, but using a standard SAP process to do that. Doing regular table reorgs so that we don't end up with indexes with massive gaps in them, and then reclaiming the storage within Azure. And then for the non-production systems, we just did that through refreshes. So we'd refresh the QA or the regression system from production, which naturally just gave us that drop. So that was the quick wins. Quite a bit of focus from the basis team to achieve that. Had to apply a bit of pressure in times. It's like, oh, we've got more important things to do. And it's like, no, we just need to crack on and get this done. Thankfully, because we cracked on and got it done, we didn't get impacted by sort of COVID coming along when it did, sort of in March time, because we'd got this out of the way by then. So then on to the harder stuff. So our initial approach for this was only look at ECC6 systems. So we had another sort of strategy piece we were looking around with BW, with moving that to either BW on HANA or BW for HANA, but also doing hot, cold, warm type storage approach to that. So then that would deal with the archiving problem in BW. So we didn't bother looking at that from this piece. We focused on FI, SD, and MM because that's where our gains were going to come from. In PP, in CS, PM, there was a decent amount of data, but there wasn't enough to go after initially. That was going to be a sort of a second or a third phase type approach to go after those modules. Also, as well, another decision we made, remember I mentioned about being a bit tight on money all of a sudden, having spent too much in 2018. The other thing we looked at as well was, how do we do this archiving cheap? So we could go to a number of vendors out there and buy a platform, whether that's ILM from SAP or something from OpenText or elsewhere, or you can just bung them into files on a cheap bit of storage in Azure and get the same outcome. So that outcome may not be as fast to retrieve the data when the business want to look at it. But when you're looking at documents from 5 years ago or 10 years ago, does it need to be that quick? So we took an approach of we can just spin up some storage. As we do the archiving, the files can get loaded onto that storage. We can grow that storage as we go based on how those files are created. At the point we decide where deletion kicks in. So if we say, right, okay, UK, for example, we've got to keep invoices for 7 years, so we can delete after 7 years if we want to. We can then hit the appropriate files to delete those files and delete the references in SAP to those files. So there's easy ways of dealing with that. But also by taking this approach of not doing deletion and just doing archiving as well, was we didn't really need to agree it with the business because they could still see the document. Because the standard process allows you to still read that document in from the file. It just loads a little bit slower. So from a business decision point of view, it was more a case of, we're doing this, your system's going to get faster. Are you happy? Yes, great. We'll get on with it. So we had a little bit of an easier life there of not having to go, oh, I might want to look at that document from 20 years ago in 5 years' time, so you can never delete it or anything. The other thing with taking that file-based approach as well was we could use cheap storage in Azure. So we didn't need to have premium SSD or anything like that the Oracle databases are running on. We could have some cheap storage as a service approach within Azure, which was going to save us a significant amount of money. Also, as well, as you create those files, you reduce a lot of space because you're getting rid of all of the index entries as well, because it's just a cheap, small, raw file in comparison. So we brought TJC in to deliver the archive objects we'd identified and basically take the project to the end of SIT. So we provided a project manager, ended up being 3 project managers as people left the organization and things like that. But we basically, TJC were owning it, probably 95% of that delivery up to SIT. So TJC configured the objects based on discussions with us as far as, okay, you need to choose between this setting or this setting, and we'd make those decisions. TJC then tested it, provided test documentation to prove that things had worked as expected. And then the process they go through is they then do this gap analysis piece where basically they go, right, we've done some stuff. Tell us what worked and not worked. And then from that, we were then able to identify, is there anything that needs to be tweaked or changed or done slightly differently, or it's all good. So you can almost treat that as like a technical UAT almost. So the basic rules we came up with was 3 years from creation date, but with appropriate dependencies per object. Most of those are just built into SAP. And you can download the slides later rather than me going through the individual objects. But based on the 2 SAP systems being configured slightly differently, we had some different objects on the different systems appropriately. So as we got to here, it was then a point of, right, how do we make this live? And we were thinking originally, again, because of being tight and cheap at the time, was we'd just schedule jobs to run these archiving jobs. Problem with that, as we sort of discovered, as we thought about it a bit more and a few more conversations with TJC, is we're then in a state of pretty much probably having 1 or 2 people just doing this constantly. And even if we get them from our offshore partner, that's still sort of quite a bit of money. And also as well, we've got some restrictions in that say if I'm archiving my sales documents, I would be archiving by a time period, not necessarily breaking it down by sales org. So if I divest a bit of the business later on, and then I need to move that part of the system and also the archive objects associated with it to that other company, if it's all buried within these massive archive files, I've got a nightmare and a headache ahead of me. And given the world of acquisition and divestiture going on all the time, and having experienced it, having been spun out of Sealed Air, knew there was a risk there. So something that TJC offer, which we weren't interested in the first place, just because of being really tight on money and trying to achieve something. But what they have is they've got the Archive Sessions Cockpit, which basically automates the hell out of your archiving process. Gives you complete control over it, means that you can have someone just occasionally keeping an eye on it, and it just takes care of it for you. Also as well, a really, really good thing as well is if you can have an outage, basically just run this transaction and it just calmly stops everything running on the archiving side. And then when you finish your outage, you then come back up and it goes, oh yeah, I was there, and just picks it up and carries on. So lots of control, makes your life easy, stops someone junior from your partner doing something crazy as well. So overall, lots of control. And I had one of my team running this when we did this sort of first piece of archiving. And within half an hour training, he was running with it completely, pretty much. Apart from every time he couldn't be bothered to look at the documentation, ringing Ruben up to go, how do I do this? But the documentation that comes with it is really good and user-friendly as well. So we decided to buy Archive Sessions Cockpit. It's an add-in to SAP, so it's not a separate system or anything like that. It's in its own namespace. So you're using your standard transport management system to move it through to production. There's some config to set up in there, not a huge amount. And you remember back, I was talking about we were doing this sort of 2021. We're now into 2022. Some of the reasons for the durations is our history made us very nervous about archiving. So back in 2018, when we'd spun off from Sealed Air, one of the SAP systems had been a complete copy of the Sealed Air system, which included Sealed Air data and Diversey data. To get rid of the Sealed Air data, I think it was about March time of 2018, they just ran archiving against invoices and sales documents and production orders and things like that, and just hammered the system, didn't do any of the redo processes, and our system ground to a halt and stopped working. Couldn't even open a transaction to create an invoice or create an order. So there was reasons that happened. Sealed Air were a bit stupid, and they didn't care because they'd sold us by then and they'd had the money, so they didn't really worry. And they were just taking the approach of, well, it's our data, we need to get it out of your system. We don't really care what it does to you. So, but as a result, everyone was very scared about archiving because of this headache that had been caused before. So, as a result, there were a number of big transformation initiatives we were doing. We were consolidating all of our warehouses to a single warehouse in Europe. We were building a new manufacturing site, twice the size of any of our other manufacturing sites worldwide in Kentucky, which also had a massive warehouse associated with it as well. So with these activities happening as well, they said, no, hold off on the archiving, hold off on the archiving. And then we eventually got to a point in 2022 where we had to get brave and just get on with it. And there was a little bit of, bullying is probably a harsh word, but there was a little bit of pressure from me across to the other IT teams to sort of go, we've just got to deliver this and get on with it. And we took an approach of, we'll go after one object for a very small date range, and we'll prove that hasn't impacted the system. So at the time, I had the SD team reporting into me along with a number of other teams. So that was the easiest one to influence, because if I said we had to do that, we did that. So we went with the SD team first of all. And one of the systems we did 2003 or 2004, ages ago. So not going to impact anyone. And we did that. We then had another getting together, went through, did anything happen? Oh no, but we did archive, but you didn't notice. So it's okay. And then we gradually ramped up, added in other objects, added in the other system, and gradually grew up, but continued those regular checkpoints to make sure that everyone was happy and feeling safe about it. We had a couple of the bases team monitoring the system, occasionally going, "You've had a jump running for 36 hours." And we went, "Yep, we know." But the system usage wasn't that dramatic. We had our Oracle database team doing redo logs on a regular basis and things like that as well, monitoring the database. But if we hadn't had the archive sessions cockpit, we wouldn't have been able to move and adjust and change and tweak our approach as quickly and easily, or have it as controlled. And if we had had a problem, we knew we could shut it all down quickly rather than having to go and find the 25 jobs and shut down the 25 jobs. So overall, archive session cockpit definitely made our life easier. Licensing was pretty good, I would say, and certainly cheaper than having a couple of people in India sat there 24 hours a day. So what did we achieve? So between October 22 and December 22, so including the slow ramp up, we got everything archived up to the end of 2017 for everything apart from one of the FI objects. And that was 120 million documents we archived in that period. We then had a break for Christmas in our normal change freeze, and then started stuff back up in February. And someone who doesn't work for me now is still running with that now, and sort of that sort of carried on through until about July, August time, and then we put archiving on hold. Reason for that was the Solenis acquisition, and Solenis have got a very aggressive ERP consolidation strategy of taking those SAP systems, and we're down to 8 other ERP systems and putting them into their SAP system by March next year. So anything else that's happening got stopped, because do that sort of consolidation in 9 months. Don't know whether it's going to happen in 9 months, but to do that sort of consolidation in 9 months, you can't be messing around with anything else. Couple of things to watch out for, I would say, is for your finance teams, FS10N, if they're using the drill down in that, by standard, it doesn't hit the archived objects. There is an SAP note you can apply, which means it does. But it's in the standard documentation, so it doesn't do that. We had finance kick off because they couldn't see 2017 drill downs. And it's like, why are you still looking at 2017? We're in 2023 now. But we fixed that with the note. One of the steps you need to make sure you do, which my team member forgot on a couple of objects, was set up the filling of the SAP infrastructures, which allows the infrastructures to then read from the archive objects, which then means all your standard reports can look over the archive objects as well as what's in your database. The other piece is when we did the gap analysis, because of other things on, and it's archiving, which is a bit boring and dull, the functional teams didn't necessarily take it as seriously as possible. So, for example, when we had the issue with FS10N from a business point of view, I was having discussions with the FI team to go, but you knew this. And they went, no, we didn't. But if they'd read the documentation and followed what we'd asked them to do in enough diligence, then we'd have been okay. Archiving is never a priority. The whole time I was at T-Mobile and EE, I kept on putting archiving on our annual operating plan, and it always got shelved. I think we're in a different position now with things like HANA databases being a lot more expensive, and you're not wanting your massive systems in there, that archiving is maybe a bit more of a priority. But trying to get that as a priority within IT is hard. Getting it as a priority in business is really, really hard, which is why the approach we took, we actually got somewhere because we didn't really have to involve the business with the approach we took. And then the final point, and this was just in one company, one country code, we had this issue, is rebates agreements. If they're very long aged rebates agreements, like we had some running from 2003 to today, don't read the archive billing documents, and the standard archive object doesn't look for it being associated with a rebate agreement. So we had a slight problem there, which I just said, well, you're supposed to renew these every year, not just extend them. So that got fixed as a business problem. So why TJC for archiving? They know their stuff. They're an SAP partner, so they've got that bit of accreditation. They're very flexible as well. It wasn't like working with some partners where it's like, but you said you were going to have this by here, and it was a case of, if things needed to move a bit, they were flexible enough so things could move around a little bit. So that was useful for us at the time, and especially as we were still sort of traversing the sort of COVID world when we started this off. They're definitely experts in the area. They've been there, done it. They've got more T-shirts than you can fit in a suitcase associated with this. So they know what's going to work and what's not going to work. They're also very good at putting people at ease around what the impact to your system is and things like that, because they've been there and done it. Their software is good. It's not overdone. It's fit for purpose. You're not being told you have to buy all this and then only use this bit. You're buying this bit, which is the bit you need. And I can honestly say they deliver. And the reason I'm here talking today isn't because of the Ferrari they've bought me in the car park. It's just a way of saying thank you for the work they did with us and the partnership we had in that work and the delivery they did. So from where are we now? I mentioned earlier we were purchased by Solenis in July 2023. We're consolidating onto their suite on HANA. Solenis are looking at archiving. They've never been very transaction heavy before. So just to give you a comparison, they place as many orders a year as we do in Italy a month. So their database is going to grow dramatically quickly. So they're going to have to look at putting some control over that. The other thing they're looking at with TJC is their enterprise legacy system application, which is where you can sort of archive your legacy systems. So for those SAP systems I talked about, that are being consolidated into the Solenis SAP system, they're only going to take open documents into there. So anything that's closed is going to sit in those systems. And do you really want to run those as proper SAP systems, or chuck them into this archiving tool for those applications? And cheaper way of operating them, cheaper way of running them. And that's it from me. Any questions? Yes.
I'm curious why you did a quick win where you managed to break even after the work. Because you managed to make a financial analysis saying.
So the quick wins we did internally, using within our AMS team. We had a couple of people that we pulled in from that we're already paying for. When we looked at the reduction we got on our Azure cost, it more than covered the effort they put in. And that was just for the initial saving we made without then thinking about the growth we were then managing. So, but if we'd gone external, you'd have probably had to take some of that growth into account for covering that. Yep.
I think generally with a rule of thumb, we've always sort of said that if a company's got more than 1 or 2 terabytes, then it's a worthwhile exercise to do. These type of presentations, that there is a danger you're always talking about huge amounts of data, and it might not relate to your business in particular. But really, the benefits of archiving, and certainly managing the sort of the ongoing archiving processes. Really anybody with more than 1 terabyte of data can see the benefits of that.
Those as well as the system. The closure rate, you've got a sales order. And again, it varies from industry to industry. Our manufacturing. And that's where we do the
and just kind of a rough figure, if you want to, what savings you would have for your business. Generally, we can probably get up to very many things. just to give you an idea, we can kind of nearly half the amount of data. Open items and depending on what system.
It depends on the amplifier. Again, flatlining as much as possible. One thing that Gareth mentioned before. Do a gap analysis. There is a particular sales order that has to have a file. Exactly.
Yeah.
You need to document parts. Once we've done that, we've done
The other thing to think about as well, if you've got the data, it can be presented in court. If you haven't got the data, it can't be presented in court. That's another thing to think about with what you keep hold of. That's me working for an American company, by the way.
ask a question. For a custom So essentially what we're trying to do is archive the data.
Yep.
Two questions.
So for the example of the issue we had with FS10N, it was very difficult to prove the fix to that because we hadn't archived in the quality system at that point. So there was no reference data to see did it pull through. So that gave us a small issue. As far as can the business still run the reports, as long as you're filling those info structures as you're archiving, the reports, the standard reports, your custom reports won't do it, but your standard reports will still add those archive objects into the infrastructure. So from a business point of view, the approach we took was pretty transparent, apart from them finding out this FS10N thing. And there was also an authorization thing as well, where the people that attested had the archive authorization object, and some users didn't have that object. But then we added that object into our standard sort of base role. So everyone got it. But giving them access to the archive doesn't mean they get access to the document, because the standard SAP security still works on, if you can see the sales org, you can still see the data in the archive object. If you can't see the sales org, you can't see the data in the archive object.
Can I just maybe also add to the reporting? The majority of the SAP standard reports do access the archive. However, it's possible to, if it is a big report or a custom report, it's possible to adapt those reports to the archive as well. But again, it comes back to the testing, the gap analysis. Your organization doesn't necessarily use the same reports as the next organization. So it's very important to test those and make sure that before you take it live, that all the reports that are used very well in your business do cater for the archive data.
And think about what your reporting strategy is, as far as what should you be doing in ECC6 as opposed to doing in a BI solution as well. So once you start talking about age data, should we really be using ECC6 for that, or should we be using something that's more fit for purpose for that?
A quick question on the content, the PDF document. How do you have dealt with that technically?
So that one, to get rid of the terabyte we had in SoftCon on one of the systems, we basically spun up a server in Azure to act as the content repository, and then just moved everything there, and then set it so that everything was stored there rather than being stored in the database.
Gareth, Steve, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.